If you grew up in the 1980s, then you already know that there was a time when racing games looked and played very differently from what you see today. You weren't driving around a course or even competing against other racers, but rather you were fighting against the clock just to keep going until the track either ended or you made it to the end just to go on to the next level. That's the inspiration behind the new game Classic Sport Driving, a throwback racer that tosses realism straight out the window in order to be the spiritual successor to games like OutRun and Rad Racer. It's obviously far from the only modern racer to take this old school approach, but is it one of the best? That's what we're about to find out when I review Classic Sport Driving by Pixel Rappers. A retro-inspired game crafted for a genuine driving experience. That's how first-time developer Pixel Rappers describes their new game Classic Sport Driving on its Steam page, and no matter what I have to say about its debut release, they're definitely right. This is indeed a driving experience based on the classic racing games that we grew up with, for better or worse. Now, if you've played games like Rad Racer and OutRun, then you're going to feel right at home with Classic Sport Driving. Instead of going around in a boring circle, this is a point-to-point racer where we're speeding against the clock. Like a lot of 1980s racers, you're not really competing against other drivers. In fact, the other cars on the highways are really just there to act as an obstacle. The goal in each stage is to go fast enough that you'll cross through the different checkpoints, which will then give you an extra boost of time and allow you to catch up to the 1, 2, or 3-star times. These are conveniently represented on the track, giving you something to chase after in the absence of other racers. Look, Classic Sport Driving is not the first modern racing game to find inspiration from the classics of the 1980s. This one continues in the tradition of using simple polygons to create the illusion of these old games, which is something that doesn't quite match the pixel graphics of OutRun, but are close enough to trigger that nostalgic feeling. While a bit sparse, the hand-drawn graphics generally look good and do help to give the different tracks some much-needed personality. And because the game is working with polygons instead of pixel graphics, the developers were able to create a racing game that is both fast and smooth. Of course, it helps that the game plays surprisingly tight for this type of racing game. As an arcade-style racer, it probably won't come as much of a surprise that the controls are extremely simple, with little more than a brake and accelerator button. And while that may initially sound limiting, it really leads to a great playing game that outclasses most of the retro-themed speedsters that I've been playing in recent years. This is one of the few racing games where using the brake doesn't immediately send you into last place. And I have to commend the developers for making it both easy to play and easy to master. Now, as a single-player game, Classic Sport Driver is split up into 16 individual stages that are grouped together into 4 increasingly challenging tournaments. Ideally, you'll catch up with the fastest time and earn 3 stars in every stage. But don't worry, because you can still open up the new tracks by snaking a single star. Completing these 16 stages will take you around 2 hours. And you can add another 2 or maybe 3 hours of time if you want to go back and earn a perfect score on each track. It's worth pointing out that the single player mode is only part of the package because a lot of the fun comes from going back and playing the randomly constructed courses. This mode will give you an unlimited amount of tracks to race, each pulling from different locations, weather conditions, and obstacles. There are also daily tracks to beat, allowing you to compete against other like-minded racers in the online leaderboard. The problem that I ran into is that no matter if the track was developed for the game or randomly constructed by the computer, the point-to-point races are extremely forgettable. The one and only memorable stage comes in the form of a race set right next to a dangerous cliff. And now when I say that it's right next to it, I mean that the only thing standing between you and flying straight off the side of that mountain is an occasional sign. This is a great example of using the sides of the track, or lack thereof, to add a new obstacle and ratchet up the stakes. Unfortunately, that's pretty much the only one that stands out in any meaningful way. You see, in a lot of ways, Classic Sport Driver feels a lot like a first draft of a half-finished game. I was honestly taken aback when I discovered that this wasn't an early access release. Sure, the game looks good and handles well, but it doesn't have a lot of the things that you would expect from a racing game. For example, you're limited to driving the same yellow sports car in every single race. You can't choose another variety or even change its color. And that goes for the other cars on the streets too. Don't expect to see a nice mix of cars, trucks, and maybe even motorcycles getting in the way, because everybody else on the road is driving the same blue car. Couple that with the forgettable courses and the sparse backgrounds, and Classic Sport Driving has a real problem feeling a bit samey. Look, perhaps some of this comes down to it being an inexperienced developer prioritizing gameplay and presentation over some of the bells and whistles. But even then, you'll likely never shake the notion that the game feels unfinished. This is especially frustrating when you factor in the $15 asking price, which seems too high for what you get in this game. While I'm sure that some people will find a lot of replay value in the randomly constructed stages, that simply wasn't enough to keep me engaged for very long. Classic Sport Driving is a great playing throwback racer that I want to recommend, but you should probably wait for a sale. Inspired by 1980s racing greats like OutRun and Rad Racer, Classic Sport Driver is a fast-paced throwback with great gameplay and an endless supply of randomly constructed stages. While it looks good and is a lot of fun to play, this debut release from Pixel Wrappers is light on content and customization, leading to a bunch of levels that look and feel almost identical. Couple this with a too high asking price and you have a fun game that falls way short of being a true racing contender. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every single day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite arcade racing game? I'm not saying it has to be an actual arcade game, but you might get bonus points if it has one of those really big sit-down cabinets. Remember, bonus points are not worth anything, so let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back shortly with a look at Nintendo Switch Online games that we haven't yet covered in the review crew. Trust me, it'll make way more sense when the video goes up. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.